So there's a good title card for you. Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. We are analyzing the top 5% of streamers. And why are we analyzing them? Well, we are analyzing them to look for a subset of streamers within this top 5% niche category to determine if there are common traits that link those streamers. We're also looking for traits that are notable in the space that don't matter based on the data to streaming access in any way. And we're also looking for any kind of notable data spikes and seeking to be able to explain them. And we want to give you an idea of activities that will make you successful in this subset of retro video game streaming and also link to the past. Common traits that link to the past, then? Yeah, pretty much. All right. Who are we looking at? We're looking at today in depth. Doesn't mean that these are the only people that I looked at, but we're looking at Andy, Toystream, Kelsie, and Edward with a bunch of W's. I think there's actually one W missing there. So, sorry to him if he sees this video. But that's a lot of W's, man. It's hard to get a lot of W's in there. We're sorting once again based on watch time because this is a subset of a subset. The fact that we're not sorting by average viewers doesn't really matter. What we're looking is seeing where people are spending their time watching things on Twitch. What I did want to note, though, is that you'll see at the bottom, there were many outliers in the overall data set, and there are a absolute ton of speed gaming channels and whatnot that make up a lot of kind of the top 10, at least, probably a bit further than that, actually, because of randomizer, basically. Randomizer tournaments, there's 4 or 5 speed gaming channels that do randomizer. There's actually randomizer channels that do randomizer. So obviously randomizer being very huge, to no one's surprise who's remotely familiar with A Link to the Past on Twitch. We're going to see how that plays out in relation to different things like speedrunning, different things like content as a service, which is a topic that I'll kind of discuss that you may not know what the hell I'm talking about right now, and that's okay. We'll get to that. And we're also going to look at the relationship of randomizer and other things. Last time, you'll recall that we had in Super Mario World our community thing. Well, the community thing in Super Mario World was ROM hacks. The community thing in Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past is also technically a ROM hack, and it's randomizer. I guess one other thing that I'll notice, and I'll just kill myself from the webcam for a second. Once again, followers, the least important statistic on all of Twitch. Average viewership probably being the most, but for our purposes, not so much. You'll see the followers here are all over the place. Some people like Koi actually have a pretty good average viewership to follower ratio. So I thought that was really notable, and I think there might be some things that we'll talk about in his data that also explain that a little bit. So who are we looking at first? We're looking at Andy. Andy hardly needs introduction, but I thought that one thing I'd do to improve these quote-unquote slides or data set is to basically feature a little bit more about the streamer in case there are people watching this now or on YouTube later who don't quite know a lot of things about the streamer that we're talking about. So Andy had an account created in April 16th of 2012. Effectively started, well, we have no idea because the publicly available data only goes back around a rolling 5 years or so. So we don't actually know. And that's why you see, the dates and whatnot are so garbled at the bottom of that screenshot from Sully-Gnome. There's only so much, but based on the trend line of the data, which you can see in gray that kind of runs through those green peaks and valleys, you can surmise that, he had a more limited viewership up until around that point of more than 5 years ago. So just because people's accounts are created in a certain year doesn't mean that they're streaming. They could be interacting on Twitch. In Andy's case, though, I do believe he is quite a long time streamer. So Andy is a long time Link to the Past streamer and speedrunner. Had multiple GDQ appearances, very good runs, very funny couches, extremely high quality. And he is a 2-time randomizer champion in the tournaments. The interesting thing about him, it is a pretty straightforward linear graph dating up to, June, July today. There is a bit of a spike that's happening kind of around it's hard to see those dates, I know, but it's around the December kind of time frame. You can kind of see right around here, that's the spike that we're looking at. I tried to do some extra digging to figure out why the spikes actually mattered. And one thing that I think was really interesting is that is December 2019. think I said 2019, but I just want to make sure that's absolutely clear. And you might recall a little thing called COVID started to happen around that time. And I think the traffic and attention on streaming got a lot higher. That's one explanation. And I think that is a common explanation probably across all streamers of variety of sizes, especially established ones who would already command an audience. New people come in and say, hey, here's someone who has social proof, i.e. people are watching them. I'll try watching this person too. Hey, I really like this guy. Let's keep watching him. That average viewership kind of spikes. But another explanation, if we want to dig a little bit deeper than that, is that there was a GDQ that happened, I guess it was AGDQ 2020, and they did a crowd control randomizer race that was really well done by Andy and also very funny, very entertaining. And I think that drew a lot of eyeballs to him. You'll notice that with speedrunning and GDQ, as we talk about, these different streamers, their speedrun backgrounds, what they bring, that actually matters a lot, that exposure. Now, he's been to multiple GDQs because he already commanded a pretty good sized audience before this spike. And if you want to get real micro with the data, I'm sure there's a ton of other spikes. You can actually see one kind of, about maybe a year back from that. But this is a pretty notable one because it is a bit more of a lift on the graph. And I think that, in the absence of anything else, and I looked hard. I looked hard to find anything around that time period, YouTube videos, what have you. Nothing else was really out of the ordinary. So I have to think that this spike, once again, is because of that GDQ bump, which is a trend that we have been observing since we did Super Mario World. Next, we're looking at Koi. Interesting thing about Koi. Right off the bat, I want to get to this because I find this is very, very interesting compared to anyone else that we've looked at so far in this series. His account was created October 2nd, 2015. You'll notice his effective start date, May 2018. How rare has that been in the times that we've done this kind of data analysis so far? Been very rare. Most people have been 2017 or sooner. So the fact that someone has created an account in 2015, really started streaming with it in 2018, and then went on to achieve a pretty good number of successes and a pretty good average viewership. Very impressive, and really kind of an outlier date-wise to what we're looking at right now, which I find to be very interesting. You'll obviously notice the gigantic spike. Let me come back on webcam a bit to talk about that. And once again, I tried to look into these with even more zeal than I did when I was doing Super Mario World, because I think we deserve to know why spikes are happening. And that spike, when I investigated it, is actually from a single day in September of 2019. And it's really interesting because there's nothing on YouTube. There's nothing on Twitch necessarily. There's nothing on the internet that really can explain this one. What I noticed was a few hours, he had about typical viewership for him, which at this point would have been around the 50 to 100, let's say 75, 80 range. And then all of a sudden it jumped to 500 people. And then it pretty much stayed and hovered around an average of around 400 or so for a good 2 to 3 hours after that. I don't 100% know why this spike occurred. There's nothing that we can really see from a point of view of analytics, publicly available data that's going to definitively state, hey, this spike happened because of this. What I have to surmise is that this was the rare case of someone big has raided somebody, and Koi was so entertaining and good at what he was doing that they stuck around for basically the duration of the stream. Then you get a bit of social proof in that too, because we've talked about that a few times already. Social proof being, that existing viewership. Hey, I'm already good. You should probably watch me. If that stays for a little while, someone's clicking on Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past. They want to know who to watch. Chances are at that time, because Koi streams late, this was going to be the top category. So everyone who's already going in and wondering who to watch goes, oh man, there is a lot of viewership here. Maybe I should see what's going on. So we talked a lot in the past about discoverability on Twitch. Discoverability on Twitch being bad when you're a bit on the smaller side. Not to say that Koi is small. In this game and category, he is not. but small compared to a lot of Twitch, even still with this spike. You no longer have the burden of discoverability for that period of time being top ranked in your category. You go on and other people come in and they say, hey, you're at the top. You are automatically more discoverable. And he's had a decent upward trend since. So could this be maybe a rare case where he got some discoverability on Twitch in a very organic sense and then has capitalized on it to reach sustainably higher audiences, not necessarily by virtue of doing something different, although I'm not discounting that either. What I'm saying is the difference being discoverability, not to say that a streamer is good or bad, but that people actually come in and then they say, hey, this person's actually cool. I would have never found this person before. So that I found really interesting. Those two pieces, super interesting. I'll let you read the right-hand side of this too. Streams randomizer, about 6 times a week. And it's starting to get a bit more variety in that schedule. But for the most part, streaming a lot of randomizer. He has a YouTube channel that has very notable guides to how to rando on YouTube. How to do certain tricks, like how to hair a pot, or how to jump down from a ledge immediately instead of having to wait for a link, that kind of thing. And the interesting thing about the YouTube videos, because we've talked about the YouTube videos a lot, is we always say, like, you want to do a YouTube or something else to enhance your discoverability. But at the same time, we are also implicitly implying that this YouTube needs to be really good, diverse, highly edited stuff. The other path to that, and these aren't mutually exclusive, is to make guide content. A lot of his YouTube is guide content. Frankly, a lot of it's not great, like in terms of an actual YouTube video. Like it's him, he's playing the game, he's voicing over it. There's not much of a script. There's delays and preambles. But I think that by virtue of kind of doing these things better and first before other people have done them and promoting those guides, it has drawn attention to him. And this is what I mean when I start talking about content as a service. So we'll talk about content as a service a bit more. That would be getting a bit ahead of ourselves. We have other people to look at first, so let's go ahead and do that. You want to look at Kelsie. Kelsie is also notable. If you know who Andy is, you probably know who Kelsie is because they are together. Andy is her spouse. Her account was created on February 6, 2013. Effective streaming start date is somewhere around July 2017. I try not to do this with people who are together because I think that it can skirt the lines of being inherently sexist. And so please don't think I mean that when I say this, because I don't. But her graph is really, really similar to Andy's. Let me flip back to Andy's for a second. Like, obviously Andy's is more pronounced because he's a bigger streamer and he's been around a bit longer too. But like, look at this. Like, you almost get the same ups and downs to a certain extent. I don't think you can discount the effect that Andy has had on her success. So from a data perspective, this is almost an outlier because I would prefer to look at people who have had success, quote unquote, in a vacuum. Now, that might sound kind of stupid because there is no real success on Twitch or in content creation that occurs within a vacuum. In fact, a lot of success is, as we talked about last time in the Super Mario World analysis, no man is an island. And basically what that means is that you can't do it alone. Like, you have to have the support of, promotion of community, because Twitch isn't going to help you. You have to help yourself and you have to help each other. Like, don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm not trying to say there's anything inherently bad about this or anything. If people are going to help each other out, spouses or not, that's great. I'm all for it. I think that's fantastic. I have no issue with it. But from a data perspective, it does kind of call some of the data into question. I would prefer probably to look at data and not call it an outlier if it were more of kind of like one person working in the typical skill set. Because anybody who's watching this on YouTube later, you're probably going to fit that bill. Chances are you don't have a partner who's a famous streamer. So that doesn't really help you. And that's kind of why I don't like to look at this too much. Very notable speedrunner. Speedruns and Nintendo Variety is the name of the game for Kelsie. Last person we're taking a deep dive look at on this list is Edward. I'm just going to call him Edward, probably. His account was created in October 15th, 2014. No data on effective start date. You'll notice that with his data, and let me just kill myself for a second. I should really stop saying it like that. That it's very linear, but it's also very flat. Not much growth until recently. So that was really interesting. What I think was really interesting about Edward in particular, in addition to him being very chill and empathetic, which I guess a lot of people could say, but he advertises it very prominently. That's why I made sure to put it here. And he's done a lot of speedruns since 2013. He takes speedrunning pretty seriously. There's a lot of huge practice and grinds in his Twitch VODs. He actually commented on Twitch and his About Me and says that he uses Twitch to help basically with mental illness. So streaming helps him be a better version of himself, which I think is super admirable. Now here we have another spike. That I tried to dig into a little bit. Now, Edward not being as famous of a streamer, it's even harder to find publicly available data that will really explain what the spike is. But what I did was I looked at the gaming data just before that spike. And what I noticed is that for about a month to a month and a half, he was playing Valorant, which basically is like going against all of the Twitch advice that anyone will ever tell you. Like, if you're not a big streamer, don't play a saturated game like Valorant. And sure enough, I think the advice is right, because his viewership tanked hardcore in that like month or so. It went from, if he's, just judging on this trend line in this graph, saying like a 30 to 35 average streamer, he was down to 7 or 8. Like it really killed what viewership he had. He did that for about a month and a half, returned to Zelda, and ever since then he's kind of shot up. And there's no real explanation for it from a data perspective other than that. Been very ingrained in a lot of speedrun stuff recently. Learning Majora's Mask right now as we speak. So I think that just like having a little bit more attention, maybe coming back, and then maybe having fresh eyes and a bit of a different perspective may have helped with his content. This is someone who I would be interested to track again in like 6 months and say, is there something that's more indicative later on that explains this spike of data, and hopefully his numbers continue to rise, and then we can really understand what he did. But suffice to say, it's a little bit of a mystery, because when you start getting into smaller streamers, it's a lot harder. And also, not for nothing, but I don't really have the power to like pull people and interview them either. So if I did, I would. You can help me do that by making me more of a public figure, and then people will care to do that. So that's kind of my CTA for the YouTube video. Help me become a big YouTuber so that I can interview people. I'm just kidding. Just come for the data. Come for the stuff you like. Don't worry about that. So what does this all tell us? Like, what are the common traits? And we looked at each person kind of on a one-on-one basis. Andy, Koi, Kelsie, Edward. This applies to the other people of data that I looked at. I this time grouped GDQ and speedruns. That's what SRs is. And I also did one for randomizer, because that is the community thing for Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. Here we find that from a GDQ or speedrun perspective, Koi is not necessarily known for that, because he is almost exclusively a randomizer streamer. Whereas Andy and Kelsie going to GDQ and speedrunning at GDQ themselves, Kelsie not in the main, but in Frame and Frost Fatales, the all-women speedrun event that's put on by GDQ, I believe twice annually now. And they, of course, also play randomizer as well. It's really interesting, because what I thought I was going to say as we came into this is I thought I was going to say that randomizer kind of wasn't a big deal. And I still am going to say that a little bit, because it's more about your speedrunning. Because we have 3 out of the 4 people that we deep dove have a common trait of speedrunning in some fashion, aggressively GDQ or otherwise. GDQ, remember, is just the exposure piece of speedrunning. Speedrunning is speedrunning. Interestingly, for someone who has a lot of watch time, Edward doesn't do randomizer, or at least, not as a regular thing anyway. Most of the data that I looked at suggested that randomizer really wasn't that important, and that speedrunning was, which you'll find a familiar refrain. But Koi I find very, very interesting, because no speedrun, just randomizer, and yet success. So this is someone who's bucked the trends in two ways. Started later than 2017, 2018 start time. Does randomizer, doesn't necessarily do speedruns. You can argue that randomizer is a speedrun, but I would argue instead, and I think quite logically so. You may disagree with me, I don't know if you will or not, but randomizer is a symptom of speedrunning. We wouldn't have had randomizer if we weren't doing speedruns, or any other hacks for that matter. So one is derivative of the other. It's not like they're two different games. Randomizer is a mode of play of The Legend of Zelda, which is still a speedrun, but you can't really speedrun it, you can only race it because every seed is different. Whereas a speedrun, you're always speedrunning the same thing. And that's something that's more of a common trait. So randomizer is like a discipline of this that comes from speedrunning. That's what I'm saying. What I'm also saying is that a trait that is not indicative of success is actually randomizer, with one notable exception. Randomizer is a symptom of speedrunning, not the other way around. It makes sense when you think about it. Traits may be indicative of success. We're bringing this category back and keeping it still. Average account age in this type of analysis for Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past was 7.5 years. We talked earlier about content as a service. What is content as a service? What do I mean by that? Two things come to mind when we look at our deep dive streamers. We saw Edward. We saw Koi. In Koi's case, we talked about guides, how those guides are genuinely helpful for people trying to learn tricks in the game so that they can also play randomizer at a high level. That is content that he has put out there as a service to others, which has enhanced his discoverability and made a difference in his streaming success. I think that trend of content as a service is extremely important. Edward displays it a little bit too. Why? Not necessarily because of guides. He is a mental health advocate. If his stream is a place that can solve your problem, and your problem's not just wanting to chill out or wanting some entertainment, that's a problem that every streamer is solving. This is a differentiated type of view. If he's helping you deal with mental health issues or anxieties, then that is his content as a service to you. And that explains the success that he's had. Maybe that's a bit too narrow of a niche. Who knows? We'll have to keep an eye on his data. I'm very interested in what he does. I'm really going to keep him in the back of my head. I'm being very genuine when I say that. I want to look at this guy from time to time. But I think that concept of content as a service, you put something out to be discoverable, it needs to be genuinely helpful to other people. That's why so much of people's advice on YouTube is to make YouTube videos that are guides, because YouTube has also become a search engine. YouTube is a search engine that people are trying to figure out how to do certain things, or they want to learn about something. It's becoming a lot more dominated by education. You can't just do it in a self-serving way. These two guys have had success because they've done it in a way that's been genuinely helpful. If you're not genuinely helping people with the content that you put out there as a service, it's not content as a service to others. It's content as a service. And that doesn't help others. And if you're not helping others in a place that is so community driven, Twitch and YouTube, you're actually not helping yourself. So what do we see from a conclusion from the data? Number one, in Zelda: Link to the Past streaming, speedrunning is the main factor. 2, randomizer doesn't matter as much as you might think. It is more of a symptom of speedrunning. We just discussed that pretty ad nauseum, so I won't harp on that, but that's a valid conclusion to draw based on what we saw in the data. Any very notable streamers still started at or before early 2017, with the exception of Koi. Very interesting, worth keeping an eye on. Content in Zelda: Link to the Past is more diverse than it is in Super Mario World. It is content as a service as well, and that really matters. They're not saying that all content is content as a service, but we are seeing it exhibited in this game amongst its top streamers for watch time. We are not saying, once again, personality doesn't matter. Those unique traits that people have. We're not saying that the entertainment aspect of what they do, how they entertain, and how they keep your interest doesn't matter. That does matter. We can't measure that with data. And we're not saying that incumbency doesn't help. We talked about social proof. Incumbency and social proof may as well be synonyms for one another. They matter, they go together. You can't really show that in data other than showing that someone is already an established streamer. But you're going to know that already, and that's obvious, so it's not interesting. So those are the conclusions that we can draw from Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past. That brings this chapter of the retro top 5% streamer analysis to a close. For those of you watching on YouTube, I hope that you enjoyed this. If you did, be sure to subscribe to the video. Be sure to subscribe to me. Don't subscribe to the video, although you can mentally subscribe to the video if that would help you. Maybe that would help you. I don't know if it will. If you love it that much, you might want to get yourself checked out. If you do love it that much, you can also leave a like and you can comment on the video down below, and that would help tremendously. YouTube's algorithm is basically built on people liking things, and I mean that as an abstract term. So the more you enjoy a video, the more it's going to be pushed. So if you want to help, that's how you help. And obviously getting numbers up is a big help too.